It's your Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Iowa's general election campaign is officially underway. Last week's primary, of course, gave us a number of interesting results, and we now have the beginning of an ad war. We'll talk about that a little bit later with our guests. Wayne Moyer, professor of political science at Grinnell College. Wayne, welcome back to our program.
Hello, Ben.
Karen Kedrowski with us as well, professor of political science at Iowa State University, also serves as director of the Karen Chapman Katz Center for Women and Politics, co-director of ISU's Center for Cyclone Civics. Karen, welcome back to you.
Hello, Ben. Glad to be here.
And we invite our listeners, as always, on Politics Wednesday to join us. Put some questions to our political scholars here. 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. As I said, attack ads are flying in the governor's race, the Senate races. We'll hear some examples of those a little bit later in the program. Also, we'll get Wayne and Karen's read on Rob Sand naming a fifth-generation Western Iowa farmer as his running mate. And we'll also lean on Wayne Moyer's foreign policy expertise to talk about, the uptick in attacks on Iran after that Apache helicopter was downed. But first of all, news from this morning. I wanted to get your reactions to that. The government's monthly inflation report landing this morning. The number is striking. Prices up 4.2% over the past year. That is the highest rate in 3 years. Energy costs surging nearly 4% in May alone, accounting for more than 60% of this total price increase. So this is the war coming home to Iowa kitchens, Wayne. We have to assume that, right?
Certainly we do. Certainly with the cost of living being a critical issue in the campaign, and certainly with the blockade, essentially, of oil shipments out of Iran continuing, relief is not in sight.
Yeah. Karen, inflation at 4.2% and whatever its cause, that kind of number moves elections. We saw that in 2022, 2024. How does this morning's report land politically for Iowa candidates, you think? Does it cut differently in an ag state where energy costs hit farmers, rural households, especially hard?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's important to remember that, farmers, even when they're prosperous and doing well, always have sort of cash flow issues, right? They get a lot of money when they have, have sold their crops, but then they have to make that money last through, the growing season, right? So, whatever they might have budgeted as their normal expenses now gets thrown out the window. And I think it's also important for people in urban areas to realize that folks in rural areas just have to drive farther, right? They have to go longer distances to the grocery store, the doctor, to church, wherever they're going. But also there's no alternatives, right? It's not like they can, hop on a city bus, right, and cut their expenses that way. So, and of course, folks in rural areas have on a per capita level lower incomes. So definitely higher gas prices hits them disproportionately hard for a lot of reasons. And this is really bad news for any Republicans who have been tied to the Trump agenda and President Trump's policies.
Mm-hmm. Also in national news around the country, we had 4 more primaries this yesterday in Nevada, North Dakota, South Carolina, and the one that many eyes were on in Maine. Graham Plattner won the Democratic Senate primary decisively, nearly 80% of the vote. Karen, despite the cascade of controversies, the Nazi-linked tattoo he had and had covered up, sexting allegations, reports of toxic behavior toward ex-girlfriends, Plattner's primary support held, it seems, Karen. He now faces incumbent Republican Senator Susan Collins, the only GOP senator representing a state carried by Kamala Harris in 2024. What do you think of this? What does it tell us when Democratic primary voters give a male candidate with that kind of margin, even after allegations of sexting and toxic behavior toward women. Karen, what are your thoughts, as especially considering you had the Carrie Chapman Cat Center for Women in Politics?
Right. So it certainly, I think, exposes a certain amount of hypocrisy among Democratic leaders, that these, bad behaviors that would have torpedoed candidacies in the past. Some of us are old enough to remember, say, Gary Hart, that are now sort of, glossed over, because the question then becomes who's going to, what party is going to be in control of the Senate. And there seems to be a rewriting nationally of what intolerable behavior is, and that people whose bad behavior would have ended their careers earlier now seems to be tolerated. But this has definitely shown that, like, Me Too doesn't have a lot of staying power. But I think also Susan Collins has got to be relieved to some degree, right? Because a lot of people are potentially going to be turned off by Mr. Plattner with his very long list of, damaging information that has come out about him, and that they might find it so distasteful that they will, in fact, vote to retain Senator Collins, in spite of the fact that, she's under a fair amount of attack for her support of President Trump's policies, which are largely unpopular. But she could be seen as the better alternative simply because Mr. Plattner is so badly damaged.
Yeah. Wayne, what does Plattner's landslide tell you about how Democratic primary voters in Maine are weighing electability against ideology and against character?
Right. I think probably the basic issue here is the Democrats have got to take that Senate seat if they're going to get a majority in the U.S. Senate. And it's not clear at this stage of the game that they can come up with another candidate who has a chance of beating Susan Collins. And Plattner built up very strong support, grassroots support, earlier in the campaign. And I think the question is, there's not much chance of getting this seat, but does anybody have a better chance than Plattner has? And I think the Democratic primary voters have concluded that Plattner is their best chance of taking the seat, even with all of the baggage that we have against him.
Yeah. And Wayne, what about the point made by Karen that, is this resetting in your mind what is tolerated for acceptable behavior in our candidates? Are we in a new era where those things are separated? And we used to, talk a lot on this program about, both parties saying character counts. And we know many examples of lesser things happening here. Your thoughts there? Is there a reset?
I hope not. We'll have to see what happens in the election in November. We'll see what happens in terms of Plattner's behavior overall. But clearly the competition, the very close competition between the Democratic and the Republican Party means that victory seems to be all important and more important than character, I'm afraid.
Okay. Join us with your questions for Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College, Karen Kedrowski of Iowa State University, 1-866-780-9100. Let's dive into our state politics before we take a break. We'll continue, of course, after the break with the June 2nd primary behind them. Iowa's governor race is now fully in general election mode. Iowa Auditor Rob Sand named Crawford County Supervisor Dave Mulbauer as his lieutenant governor running mate. Mulbauer, a fifth-generation farmer from western Iowa, currently in his second term as Crawford County Supervisor. It really comes from a family political legacy. Father serving in the Iowa House, grandfather serving the legislature for nearly a decade. He briefly ran for the U.S. Senate against Chuck Grassley in 2022 before withdrawing from that primary. And then we also have, before the Mulbauer announcement, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, president of the Democratic Governors Association, rallying a crowd, some 500 people in Des Moines, arguing that his two gubernatorial wins in the state that backed Trump by 30 points proves Democrats can win in red states. And Sand has framed his candidacy as a post-partisan candidacy, and calling, but Republicans say, well, Beshear was there. That's evidence of Sand's true Democratic alignment. Karen, before the break, what does Rob Sand's choice of Mulbauer tell us about the campaign's strategic thinking going into this general election phase?
Yeah, well, I think Rob Sand has been one of many Iowa Democrats that's been making the point that the party needs to be reaching out to rural voters more. And of course, with 36% of the population of Iowa living in rural areas, that's a significant chunk of the future voters. And he is trying to counter his opponent, Mr. Lane's claim that he is an Iowa farmer. Right. So by choosing an Iowa farmer who's also, like Sand, a moderate Democrat, as is Beshear, that he's, that they're making a very conscious effort to reach into what has become now a solid constituency for Republicans. And then it also gives his campaign more credibility when they speak about issues that are currently important to farmers, especially issues related to tariffs and, of course, high oil prices for gasoline and diesel. That those are, that they have more credibility to speak authoritatively on issues that are important for rural Iowans.
Okay, Iowa hasn't elected a Democratic governor in more than 2 decades. We'll talk more about this open seat race for Iowa governor. Cook Political Report rates the race as a toss-up. How do you weigh this race? 1-866-780-9100. Back with Wayne Moyer and Karen Kedrowski. Politics Day. So good to have you on board on this Politics Wednesday edition of River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer. Today with our political scientists providing analysis, Karen Kedrowski of Iowa State University, Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College. If you'd like to join us, 1-866-780-9100 or email river@iowapublicradio.org. Currently talking about the Iowa governor's race now that the June 2nd primary is behind us. We are now fully in general election mode. Iowa Auditor Rob Sand naming the Crawford County Supervisor Dave Mulbauer as his lieutenant governor running mate. Sand's Republican opponent, Zach Lane, political newcomers, worked for the Koch-affiliated Americans for Prosperity, previously lived in Kansas, registered to vote in Iowa in 2024. He has not named a running mate. The Cook Political Report rating this race as a toss-up. Let's get into the ad wars here and have Karen and you, Wayne, weigh in on these ads. Here's Rob Sand released an ad last week going after his opponent, Zach Lane's residency. Let's listen.
An economy near the bottom, but number one in rising cancer rates. Turning Iowa around will be a full-time job, but Zach Lane isn't even a full-time Iowan. Lane lives, voted, and hit it rich in Kansas as a political insider, working for billionaires and special interests, commuting to Iowa on his private plane. Lane says if elected, he'd be in Iowa as much as humanly possible. But you can't be a full-time governor if you're a part-time Iowan.
While his residency is in question, Republican nominee for Governor Zach Lane is a sixth-generation Iowan. Here he is talking about his background on election night.
My other great-great-grandfather, Friedrich Lane, who our youngest son is named after, left Hamburg, Germany at age 14, and he traveled in the stowage of the SS Wyland and made his way to Belle Plaine, Iowa, where he met my great-great-grandmother. Together, they built the homestead that remained in our family for 105 years until we lost it in 2005 when my great-grandmother passed. Ours is a long Iowa story, and it's precious to me. Every generation of my family has worked to build Iowa, has loved Iowa, and has fought for Iowa.
Okay, Karen, what do you make of these ads, the attack by Sand and Lane, emphasizing his deep Iowa roots going back many generations?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that when the revelations came out about the plane trips that Mr. Lane was taking to Kansas, that was going to be a pretty powerful attack message. And Sand has been, really repeating this charge that, that Mr. Lane doesn't really live in Iowa a lot in his speeches on the campaign trail and, of course, and now in the ad war. And so Mr. Lane is trying to counter that by talking about his personal story in terms of his family's deep roots, and that he, then can claim some authority as being an Iowan, right? But that does ignore the fact that he does spend a great deal of time in Kansas. He did live in Kansas, he did live in Montana, and he lived in other places as well. And while the term carpetbagger hasn't been used, and certainly wouldn't have the same negative connotation that it might have in the Deep South, the idea that people have a connection to the community in which they are running for public office is a very powerful one in the American political tradition. And if that is undermined, where someone seems to be really an opportunist and are sort of shopping for opportunities to run for office in where they think they might be viable, it leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. It feels like they're not really dedicated to the communities that they are representing, nor do they really understand the political culture and people's values and concerns.
Let's go to our phones, 1-866-780-9100. Eric calling from Dallas Center. Hi, Eric. What's on your mind? You're interested in this race, I think?
Yeah, I asked the question to your screener. Who do you think that the Koch brothers are going to pick for the running mate for Lane? And will that person have to be a resident of Iowa, or could they also be, like, say, somebody, Kansas or Wisconsin or Nebraska? That's what I want to know.
I hear the sarcasm there that you're saying the Koch brothers are going to pick it. Wayne, to you, of course, Zach Lane will pick his running mate. What do you think of that choice? We're waiting to hear who Zach Lane will choose. Do you have any thoughts about what would be a good counter move there to strengthen his ticket?
Well, there are a couple of things that come immediately to mind. One is that Lane was not Trump's choice to be the gubernatorial nomination. And I think the one area in the country, if I'm correct, where Trump endorsement didn't lead to victory. And so I guess the question then is, will Lane pick somebody who is close to the MAGA movement? But I don't have a really good idea who he's likely to pick.
Karen, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I couldn't come up with any names off the top of my head, but he is definitely going to want to pick somebody who can counter what are perceived as his own weaknesses, right? So, somebody who has close ties to the Iowa Republican establishment with a well-known name, possibly has served in the state legislature, held other local or statewide office, and somebody who would have sort of expertise in policy issues that he's not promoting. So he's framing himself as though, he is a farmer and an educator. So perhaps someone who comes from, professional practice, for example, or manufacturing background as a way to kind of balance what might be perceived as Mr. Lane's weaknesses.
Before we move on, Karen, your thoughts on this. I mentioned Annie Beshear, the Kentucky governor, winning twice in Kentucky, a state that President Trump carried by 30 points. Iowa's largest Trump margin has been, I think, 13 points. Does I guess we'll just say the Bashir model actually translate? He was here in the state. And if so, what does it require to work for the Democrats, a Bashir-like model?
Sure. Yeah, it can, I think. But there has to be sort of the appropriate alignment of a whole lot of variables. For one thing, you need to have a moderate candidate and a candidate who has a track record of, not just being a moderate, but also of, being able to tap into sort of ordinary Iowans' values and concerns and things like that. So it helps to have name recognition. It helps to have that kind of political experience. And that certainly to have a moderate record on a variety of issues will all help. And then, it's clear that right now, Governor Reynolds is not terribly popular. She is, stepping away from the governor's office, and so she does not necessarily have long coattails for a successor. And the fact that Mr. Lane, I think, can so easily be painted as something of an outsider to Iowa politics means that even when she endorses him, which I expect that she will, it may not carry a lot of weight going into the general election. So, I think the Cook Political Report has it right. This is a race that is a toss-up. Because there is the right Democratic candidate who is running and has secured the nomination, a moderate with significant name recognition and an ability to sort of speak plainly, as sort of a regular person and a regular Iowan.
Mm-hmm. Janie is listening in Waukee. Welcome to the program. You have a question.
Yeah, thank you. Just curious as to your guest's thoughts on why is it, going back to a comment you made earlier, why is it that rural voters are so staunchly Republican? If you look at it from an economic perspective, it seems they would not be. So maybe it's more social issues that drive that vote to the Republican side. I'm just curious on your guest's thoughts on that.
Wayne, you want to tackle that one?
Well, a couple of things there. I think part of the problem is that the farmers have not done particularly well under Trump. You had China not buying soybeans. You've got inflation. The prices of farm inputs are up. Cost of living in general is up, and I think the Republicans have not delivered on improving the life of rural people to any great degree.
Yeah, but I think that the listener wants to know, Wayne, what are your thoughts on why from what we can tell, conservative voters in rural Iowa remain staunchly conservative and backers, by and large, of Trump?
Can I jump in?
Yeah,
Karen, please.
Wayne, go ahead. And then
why they would have backed Trump is that he offered all sorts of very nice things, and I think there were general fears of immigration and other things that and Trump would really improve the lives of rural people.
Karen.
Yeah, there's a great book that came out about a year and a half ago called The Rural Voter by two political scientists, last names Jacobson O'Shea, that really looked at this question. And what they found is that, prior to 1980, rural voters did not really vote differently than did urban or suburban voters. So there was really kind of the same, distribution of Democrats and Republicans, liberals, progressives, conservatives, nationwide. But something happened with Ronald Reagan. And that was really that at the time where we begin to see that there's a realignment among rural voters and they become solidly Republican. And part of Ronald Reagan's appeal to rural voters in particular was his call to patriotism, right? And to, think about sort of classic American values and things like that. And then on top of that, you begin to also see that there's a lot of changes to rural America, population loss in government services and so forth. And so all of the Republicans who are really kind of willing to, speak in nostalgic terms like make America great again, or, bring back, prosperity or what have you, really resonated, I think, with rural voters. And then the Democratic Party, for its part, looked at the demographics and said, we don't need rural voters. If we can get suburban voters as well as our urban core, it's fine. And then that led to sort of depicting rural voters as stupid or rubes, backward, you name it. And that, of course, is not going to be a good strategy if people are looking down at rural America when they're paying attention. So if they're ignoring them or trivializing them or making fun of them, both of those are really bad ideas. So that just then further solidified the Republican appeal in rural America.
Okay, let's open the door a little wider to include the U.S. Senate race in our analysis as the lines of attack solidify there. We have Josh Turek, 47-year-old Democratic state representative from Council Bluffs, winning the primary last week, defeating State Senators Zach Walz in a hard-fought two-candidate race. He now faces Republican Ashley Hinson, currently represents Iowa's 2nd congressional district. Hinson has the backing from President Trump, Senate Majority Leader Thune, also the current occupant of the U.S. Senate seat here, Joni Ernst. The Cook Political Report just moved the Iowa Senate race from likely Republican to leans Republican. That happened the day after the primary. Let's listen to some ads here. The Senate Leadership Fund, a Republican-aligned super PAC, released an attack ad against the Democrat, Josh Turek, critiquing his votes at the State House. Let's listen.
America's favorite liberal.
Josh Turek.
Josh, great to have you with us.
Turek voted to allow men and girls bathrooms and locker rooms at Iowa schools, to allow DEI to be a requirement for a college degree. He even voted multiple times to allow taxpayer dollars to be used for DEI positions at Iowa public universities.
Oh my effing God.
Yet Josh Turek opposed school choice, even opposed the working families tax cuts that cut taxes for over 1 million working Iowa families and farmers.
Juxtapose that with what the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee launched as an ad last week that accuses the Republican Senate nominee, Ashley Hinson, of only looking out for her own interests. Let's listen.
Costs are sky high, but Hinson voted for tax cuts for the wealthiest 1%. And her net worth? It's increased up to $7 million since she first ran for Congress. While she's getting richer, Hinson voted to put healthcare access for hundreds of thousands of Iowans at risk. And for Medicaid cuts that have already helped to close down healthcare clinics and put more at risk. She voted to block a bill that could have provided billions in funding for veterans' healthcare and against capping prescription drug costs. And she supports a complete abortion ban with no exceptions.
Okay, Karen, Democrats hitting Hinson on Medicaid cuts, her personal wealth. Republicans are calling Turek a San Francisco liberal. In your research on messaging and women candidates, how does an incumbent female candidate navigate being cast, I guess in this case, as an elitist?
Boy, and both of those ads have, I think, a great deal of exaggeration going on, which, I hope we can get into in a minute. I mean, women really have to sort of navigate a double bind when it comes to their presentation of self, right? They need to be perceived as being leaders and independent and tough enough, but at the same time, they can't be too tough or lean, to be seen as, sort of a puppet, right? So they have to be both feminine and strong, and these can be kind of a difficult thing for them to navigate. So clearly here the Democrats are trying to paint Ashley Hinson as somebody who is just blatantly self-interested and selfish and, a bit of a Trump acolyte, right? Rather than, somebody who is really sort of exercising independent leadership. and, trying to capitalize on it that way. And I think we're going to hear similar kinds of ads in other races, especially against Miller Meeks, in terms of her support for the One Big Beautiful Bill and other Trump policies, too.
Okay, we have to take a short break, and we'll be back with more analysis from Karen Kedrowski of Iowa State University, Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College. And when we come back, we'll talk more about this open U.S. Senate race now that we're in general election campaign mode. And we'll go to some emails, some other input from our listeners. You can join us, 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Also, toward the end of the hour, Wayne Moyer will weigh in on the latest developments in the Middle East. Of course, they're affecting us here in the Middle West as well. Back in a moment. Back with more River to River from IPR News. I'm Ben Kiefer on this Politics Wednesday with Wayne Moyer and Karen Kedrowski. And you, if you'd like to join us, 1-866-780-9100, River to River at iowapublicradio.org. Let's jump right to our phones. Suzanne is calling from Grinnell, I believe. Suzanne, welcome to the program. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, thanks. I really like Karen's take about, I'm a farmer and I, obviously live in a rural area. I happen to vote Democratic, but I really echo what she said about how there's a great sensitivity to feeling like you are treated like you're less than and that you're stupid and rural and dumb. But I also wanted to say that I think that the last 20, 30 years of right-wing talk radio has very much shaped the identity of who you are as a farmer or a rural person. And it's voting Democrat is sacrificing your identity. It's making you other, and you are these horrible things, and so you can't bear to be that, so you can't stand to vote that.
Interesting analysis from Suzanne and Grinnell. What do you think about that? She mentioned you, Karen.
Yeah, no, I think she's straight on. That's an excellent point, Suzanne. Thank you.
Let's talk about Josh Turek, Wayne, to you on his unusual, unique biography. Disabled, spina bifida at birth, a Paralympian multiple times, first permanently disabled Iowa legislator. Wayne, I wonder if you can speak to whether a personal narrative can move voters in this type of Senate race that's going to be dominated by national messaging and outside money. We had the mention of the Cook Political Report moving that Iowa Senate race from likely Republican to leans Republican the day after the primary. What do you think? How much will his background there, in addition to his policies and the fact that he comes from Western Iowa, play a role here in giving the Democrats a chance to win the Senate seat?
I think it can, in a very close race, I think it can make a significant difference. Hinson has to carry all the baggage of the Trump administration, and facing an opponent who has a lot of very positive things to say about himself and about what he hopes to do and be able to do, that I think the personality factor could make a difference. And it does help that he comes from Western Iowa. And he's overcome a lot of personal difficulties. So I think it could make a difference.
Let's get to some emails. TJ in Coralville writing back to our governor's discussion. I've been a fan of Sand, TJ writes, for several years and was excited by his campaign announcement. As time has gone on, I've become less of a fan as he doesn't lean as far left as I'd like to. But I do recognize and appreciate that his moderate stances are what it's going to take to get the support he'll need from Republicans. TJ in Coralville, thanks for that comment. And Roger writing us, early on, we talked about Graham Plattner and his winning the Maine primary. Roger writes, your discussion about Graham Plattner ignores the fact that Plattner regrets his behavior, unlike Donald Trump and most other Republican offenders, writes Roger. Does Plattner's regret make a difference? Karen, you had a lot to say about Plattner. What about that point made by Roger?
Wow, that's a really interesting point. I think that as Plattner as more and more has come out about Plattner, his regret does seem to be disingenuous, right? And I'm, sitting here trying to think about, other people who have expressed regret. I guess the one that hops into my mind most quickly is Andrew Cuomo, who, in spite of the fact that he went on an apology tour, he still was drummed out of the governor's office in New York. So I do think that there has been, a shift in how we think of, personal foibles, these issues of character, that they are less important than what they used to be, and that what's really becoming much more important is how are they going to vote. And I think that another aspect of Plattner's character that's sort of coming out with all of these allegations is that he just might be very, very unreliable, and that he might not be the reliable Democratic vote that the, Democratic leadership is hoping that they will have. And the last person that sort of generated a lot of excitement as sort of appealing to the everyman and every woman and, being an ordinary person and so forth, sort of a new type of Democrat was John Fetterman, who has ended up being really, sort of unhappy in the Senate and not a reliable vote for the, Democratic caucus. So I think the Democrats are running a risk with Plattner for many, many reasons.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wayne, I'd like to get your take on this before we move on to your thoughts on the Middle East. You as a former U.S. Navy submarine officer a few decades ago, but also because Graham Plattner is a veteran of both the Afghanistan and Iraq wars here and has been diagnosed with PTSD. Do you share Karen's analysis of Graham Plattner and how that may be received in the general election?
I'm not sure how the military experience is going to play into this one at all. My own sense is that the things that Karen is talking about are likely to be more important than the military experience that Plattner has. So I certainly don't think that the military experience is going to be a net positive for him.
Okay, let's move on to the Middle East, heavily connected with us in the in the Middle West, with the gas prices, also fertilizer. A large quantity of fertilizer has to move through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. military says an Army Apache helicopter went down on Monday near the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump says Iran was responsible. Details, we don't really know. There's an investigation. We do know, thankfully, both pilots rescued safely. Now we have the U.S. striking back here. Wayne, I don't know how much you've been keeping up on this with your studying international relations background. We had a ceasefire extended indefinitely in April. It's been violated repeatedly by both sides. Now we've got, I don't know if we have a deal, or is it simply a ongoing low-grade war that's going on?
I think what we have going on in Iran right at the moment is a stalemate where neither side can get what it wants, and both sides think that they have an advantage over time. What the U.S. wants to do is get Iran to concede as much as it possibly can in terms of its nuclear program, get rid of the enriched uranium that it has, promise not to enrich in the future, and get a better deal than Obama was able to get. And Iran is not wanting to do that. And of course, what Iran is hoping to do is the overall stalemate over the Straits of Hormuz over time will create political problems for the U.S. president and will cause the U.S. to make concessions to Iran, not push Iran's nuclear program, but also give sanctions release and free up money that has been impounded Iranian funding. And neither side shows any sign of giving up in this. And each side is testing the other side at every opportunity. And the question is, how long will this ceasefire hold? Will both sides are being hurt by it. Both sides want a deal, but neither side is willing to make the concessions that the other side wants them to make. And so I think what we have is a very unstable equilibrium situation in Iran, and it's not clear to me how we're going to get out of it.
Karen, when we talk about our domestic attitudes toward this ongoing war, of course, the leaders in Iran don't have to worry so much about attitudes of their population, but our numbers here are striking. Only 24% of Americans say military action in Iran has been worth it. 1 in 4 Trump voters now opposes the war. 64% say rising gas prices tied to the conflict have hurt their household finances. Karen, at what point does a war that started with some public support become a genuine electoral liability? Are we there yet, you think?
Yeah, well, it's definitely an electoral liability because the war, which has never been terribly popular, is just becoming more and more unpopular. And, this takes us back to the beginning of the show, right? That, with inflation going up, a major driver of that is gas prices. Gas prices are set globally. So even though the United States itself does not import a lot of oil through the Strait of Hormuz, the fact that many parts of the world do means that, oil prices are going up for everyone. And with oil prices going up, that means grocery prices go up, right? Because we move things using petroleum products, whether they're in, whether they're in trains or trucks or what have you. So this is just becoming, a huge issue, one that really affects urban, suburban, and rural voters across the board. And on top of that, it's also tariffs, right? So with compounding, with the tariffs, which is another extremely unpopular unpopular and for Iowans a bread and butter issue, given how dependent we are on the agriculture as part of our economy, that this means that, races that should be safely Republican are now toss-ups, right? And and the president's popularity is also tanking, which is another major predictor of how the president's party will do in midterm elections.
We have the House voting to invoke war powers and direct President Trump to end hostilities. Trump calling it a, quote, meaningless vote and continuing to strike. Wayne, what does this tell us about where war powers authority actually sits right now? Does Congress have any real leverage?
I don't think it has any sort of day-to-day leverage in terms of forcing the president to cease the military operations. But I think the president is constrained. He certainly cannot send troops into Iran, and it probably will take troops to get what he wants to get. So I think he's constrained, and Congress does constrain what the president can do. But it does not have a direct positive influence in shaping the direction of U.S. policy.
Let's go to our last caller for today. Gary has been waiting, listening, incoming. Gary, welcome to the program. You want to raise an interesting new aspect for Wayne and Karen to react to, don't you? Are you looking forward to what's going to be happening in the White House, right? Tell us. Are you an Ultimate Fighter fan?
I am not an Ultimate Fighter fan, but I would like your guest thoughts and what they think of our president turning our White House and our Lincoln Memorial into a staging ground for mixed martial arts fights to celebrate our 250th anniversary.
Right. And Gary, you've probably seen him. I think Karen and Wayne have probably seen what's been erected there right near the White House. Karen, what do you think of that staging? I think it's this weekend, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's for the president's birthday. I mean, presidents have long used the White House to highlight, artists. And of course, one of the traditions is to invite national champions in to visit with the president. So, in some cases, the White House and the White House grounds are something of an American front door, where, lots of people can come through and to recognize, the diversity of what makes the United States what it is. And that would include, MMA, which I'm not a fan of, but I understand that many people are. I think there are sort of two issues that are of great concern. Number one is that this is being used as a marketing tool and a money-making venture for the sponsors, and that President Trump himself has bought stock in, the corporations that are going to be running this, as well as selling ads at the Lincoln Memorial for the news conference, right? So using the Lincoln Memorial for something other than, a stately call to, civil rights or something, but what some people see as a sort of a crass commercial venture is unseemly. And second, just the sheer size of the stadium that is being built on the White House grounds, where the arches that are above it are even higher than the White House itself, I think is causing controversy in terms of sort of diminishing the state, one of our stately symbols of democracy.
Yeah. Wayne, I guess you have the last word here. We have less than a minute about this mixed martial arts there.
I think what's critical here is the dignity of the White House. And this is not doing anything to improve the dignity of the White House. Trump, on one hand, respects monarchy and respects the dignity of monarchy, but allowing something like this to happen in the White House kind of undercuts his idea of making the presidency a more dignified place and make the White House a more dignified place. So I think this further weakens his presidency rather than strengthens it.
All right. Thank you very much for your analysis this hour. Wayne Moyer of Grinnell College, Karen Kedrowski of Iowa State University. We appreciate it.
Thank you,
my pleasure. Thank you.
There's a growing revolt against screens in the classroom, and parents are leading it. That's a topic for tomorrow's River to River. Today's program produced by Danny Gear. Technical help from Nev Kelly. I'm Ben Kiefer. Thanks for joining us.